I don't know. I don't know why I thought of this, but I was thinking about HGTV and all the HGTV shows that are out there. They're so easy to get sucked into. I mean, you have House Hunters, you have House Hunters International, you have Tiny House Hunters, you have all the houses being hunted, you have Property Brothers, but the ones that I think are just the coolest are the home remodel ones, right? Where they bring in some kind of professional, here's this family or this couple or whatever, they bring in a professional and they have, there's Flip or Flop, you have Fixer Up. The Fixer Upper is the #1 show up, obviously. Chip and Joanna, they're the best. But you have like Good Bones, you have Renovation Impossible. The idea behind this, of course, is you have your house, your apartment, whatever the thing is. And you bring in the professional. Now there's two kinds of people, it seems to me, I'm no expert, but it seems to me there's two kinds of people who bring people into their homes. The first are like, they say, well, we like our house, we like our home, but we just want to spruce it up. So they bring in the professional to kind of spruce it up. They say, well, it's kind of drab, it's kind of old, we just do something to make it pop. Like we do something to update it to like our tastes now. That's the first kind. The second kind of people who invite the professional in, they're desperate. They're saying, we can no longer live this way. Basically, the kids, there's not enough space for them, not enough space for their toys, there's not enough room for us. We work from home now, we can't entertain anybody. So basically, they invite the professionals in. They say, do whatever you need to because we can no longer live like this. Again, the first group is like, come on in and again, make our house pop, do something, cosmetic to it. And the others are like, come in, and if you need to knock down all the walls, knock down all the walls. We're desperate. And I was thinking about this, especially because this difference between cosmetic changes and structural changes. The last week we had Jesus give the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, when he contrasts these two different people. But that's not the only time in Luke's gospel where this happens. There's something similar this week, in fact. This week, we have one half of the contrast. We have the story of Zacchaeus. And we know briefly, the story of Zacchaeus is, briefly put, he's a bad man who wants to see Jesus. That's Luke 19. But right before this, in Luke chapter 18, there's the story of the rich young man. We all know that story of the rich young man. It's the story of a good man who wants to see Jesus. So this is the contrast that Luke is bringing to us. Luke 18, the story of the good man who wants to see Jesus, and Luke 19, what we heard today, the story of the bad man who wants to see Jesus. Now, let's go back to the rich young man. We know this story, but what does he do? He comes up to Jesus and he asks the question. He says, Master, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Which is a great question. It shows not only that he wants to ask Jesus this, he wants to see Jesus, he wants to know what Jesus has to say, but also he wants eternal life. That's really good. His priorities are there. And Jesus answers. He says, well, obey the commandments. Do this, this, this. And the guy says, all of these I've observed from my youth. So again, he's a good man. In fact, I would say that he's like a church kid or synagogue kid at that time. But like he's a church kid. He's a good kid. He has shown up for Sunday school. Like he's been doing what he's been asked to do ever since he was a kid. That he's kind of like right now, if we had someone here and they would say, yeah, I went to Catholic school. And so I know all the stuff. We have that happen all the time. The students have come to campus and they went to Catholic school. And so they know all the things. And actually some of them even do all the things. And they're good people. Here's the rich young man. He is a good guy. Honestly, he's like very good. But there's a problem with this. There's a problem with being a good person. In fact, I'll say this. There's a problem with seeing yourself as being simply a good person. Because if you're a good person, just like the rich young man in Luke 18, you approach Jesus as merely being curious. Like basically you're asking, hey Jesus, is there anything I need to tweak? Like, is there anything I need to adjust here? Jesus' response, of course, is, yeah, you're doing well. You're doing it. In fact, in the other gospel, in Matthew's gospel, it says Jesus looked at him and loved him. This man is already loved. But Jesus says, you lack one more thing. Go, sell all you have, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. Go, sell what you have, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. Luke says, when he heard this, he became quite sad. I think because of this, because the expectation is, I'm not a bad person, that I'm a good person. Therefore, I'm just saying, okay, Jesus, make some cosmetic changes. If you need to like put in some wall sconces here, that'd be great. Like if you want to maybe some window treatments, maybe I'll go so far as like you've been ripping up the carpet. he was interested in alterations. But Jesus is interested in transformation. And this is radically different. He was interested in cosmetic changes. Jesus is interested in structural changes. And this crushes him. You know, Luke describes it. He says, our translation says, he became quite sad. The actual way Luke describes it is he said it grieved him. In fact, the word for grieved is that the rich young man had is the exact same word that Luke uses to describe Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. He didn't become quite sad. He was devastated by this. Why? Luke says, because he had many possessions. When I think about that, I think about ourselves, like many possessions. He didn't just have possessions. He had possessions and he had performance. Like he had a lot of good things and he did a lot of good things. And I think about this. I think, possessions offer us two things. I think one of the reasons why possessions have such a grip on us is they offer us two things. In fact, performance does this too. Performance and possessions both offer us two things. One is they offer us status. Like, this is who I am. I have a lot of good things. I do a lot of good things. They give us status. They give us a sense of who I am. They also give us security. They offer us security. This is how safe I am. If I can point to my stuff that I'm holding on to, then I'm safe. If I can point to my performance, then I'm safe. Again, our possessions and our performance give us status. This is what I'm worth. Or our possessions and our performance give us security. This is what I trust. Why is that so powerful? Because, status is motivated by the esteem of others. How am I seen by other people? Well, you're a good kid. You're a good person. Great, your performance as well is you do a good job. But also, security is motivated by a fear of scarcity. And those two things, right? Status and security, possessions and performance, they can be anything. They can be money, but they can also be appearance. They can be accomplishments, like what did you achieve? But they also can be something like just being nice. And I see this so often in what we would call good people, is that there's just this desire, this need to perform, this need to be charming, this need to be seen as successful, this need to be doing well at school. I'm a scholar. I do well in sports. I've got good relationships. And again, we have this all the time on campus. Like, I'm not just a scholar. Everyone here is a scholar. Everyone who's going to class. I'm a scholar and an athlete. And not only that, I'm a scholar and an athlete who also goes to church. Like, all of these things are wrapped up. And to be asked to release one's grip on what offers you security, to be asked to release your grip on what offers you some sense of status that can seem impossible. And I think that's where the rich young man is. Of course, the question is, why are you going into all this detail with the rich young man when the gospel is about Zacchaeus? I think I know why. It's because I'm afraid. I'm afraid that too many of us are more like the rich young man than we're like Zacchaeus. I'm afraid that too many of us are clinging to our possessions. I'm afraid that too many of us are clinging to our performance, clinging to our appearance, or clinging to whatever gives us status and security. I'm afraid that too many of us are merely curious and not desperate. I'm afraid that too many of us come to Jesus merely wanting to improve and not realizing that we're lost. When someone's lost or when someone's gone in the midst of a crisis and there's medical personnel or rescue personnel who come upon any kind of crisis, one of the ways rescue personnel and those emergency services assess the situation is they try to figure out this person. Are they alert and oriented? And there's 4 levels of this. If you're alert and oriented times 1, that means you know who you are. So do you know your name? Yes, my name is Jack. Okay, great. Not me, I'd be not alert and oriented. But what's your name? So you're alert and oriented toward yourself. That's alert and oriented times 1. Alert and oriented times 2 is you know your name and you're alert and oriented to the time. So what year is it? Who is the president? That kind of thing. So you're oriented towards the time. The third level, times 3, is you know where you are. You're alert and you're oriented towards your space. So you know your name, you know when it is, you know where you are. Alert and oriented times 4 means you also know the events, like you know how you got there. You're in the midst of a crisis, you're lost, and you know how you got there. So to be alert and oriented times 4 means you know who you are, you know when you are, you know where you are, and you know how you got there. I would say Zacchaeus, in the story today, I think he had become alert and oriented. I think he was alert and oriented. He knew who he had become. He knew he wasn't a good man. He knew the kind of person he was. I think that he knew that he was late in life. I think late in his life, I'm assuming that he was a bit older, because I'm guessing that he knew that he had used his youth to become wealthy in an evil way. And I think he was alert and oriented because he knew where he stood. He knew where he was. He knew where he stood in this community. He was a villain. He was hated. And I do believe that he knew how he had gotten there. Just one compromise after another. I have the sense that Zacchaeus, he knew all this. I believe that he was alert and oriented times 4. And I want to say this again. He knew that his possessions meant nothing. I'm guessing this. I'm guessing that he had lived long enough to realize that emptiness. You know, we hear those stories all of the time about the millionaire who commits suicide, the billionaire who leaves everything, the celebrity who's absolutely miserable. This is Zacchaeus. He knew that all those things meant nothing. He knew he had no status. He knew he was hated. I mean, picture the scene. He's climbing up a tree. Here is, who climbs trees except for someone who has no sense of status? He has nothing to hold on to when it comes to the people in his community. He knows that they hate him, and they hate him for a rightful reason. In fact, he knew that he was the villain. How do I know this? When he has this conversion moment, right? What does he say? One of the things he says is, if I have defrauded anyone, I will repay them 4 times over. Now, this is remarkable. In the Old Testament, if you've stolen something from someone, you had to pay them back, plus 20%. That was kind of the rule in the Old Testament. If you stole something from someone, you paid them back plus 20%. So Zacchaeus should have said, if I defrauded anyone of anything, I'll pay them back plus 20%. That's the rule. But in the book of Exodus, if you cost someone something that's irreplaceable, like if you kill someone's ox or their sheep, you owed them that ox back, that sheep back, times 4. 4 times what you had cost them. So here's Zacchaeus, who says, if I've defrauded anything from anyone, I'll pay them back 4 times over. Why? Because Zacchaeus knew, here's how bad he was. He didn't just steal from people, he ruined people's lives, and he knew it. He took from them what he could never give back. He absolutely destroyed people's lives. He knew that he was not a good man. So he knows all these things. He knows who he is. He knows who he became. He knows how he got there. But he didn't know, what he didn't know, if there was hope for him. What he didn't know is if it would ever be possible for him to be different. What he didn't know is if it would ever be possible for this man who is completely lost to ever be found. I think this is the primary difference between the rich young man and Zacchaeus. The rich young man was curious, and Zacchaeus was desperate. The rich young man was interested in alteration when Zacchaeus knew he needed transformation, and the rich young man was doing fine. He just wanted to slightly improve when Zacchaeus knew that he was lost. And what happens? Jesus comes into this man's life, in 2 men who are trying to see Jesus. He comes into Zacchaeus' life, this life of this bad man, and what does he do? He says his name. You ever notice that? That's remarkable. Jesus has never met this man, and he knows his name. So he's alert and oriented times 1. He knows who he is. And he says, today, I'm going to have dinner with you. This is your opportunity. This is the chance. This is the time. He's alert and oriented times 2. He says, we're going to go to your house. Well, I'm going to go to the place where you live, where you are. And he's alert and oriented times 3. And he says, lastly, some of the last words that Jesus says to Zacchaeus here in Luke's gospel, he says, salvation has come to this house. You have hope, and we know how it got here. Now, this is the crazy thing. Jesus does this. He wants to do this, but he can only do this for us if we stop thinking of ourselves as good kids. Like, we stop thinking of ourselves as good people who just need some alterations. If we just stop seeing ourselves as good people who just need to hold on to our possessions, hold on to our performance, and if Jesus wants to come in and change things, he's just going to steal things away from us. But when we realize that, as Scripture says, all of us had gone astray like sheep. Every one of us has fallen short of God's glory. Every one of us has turned our back. Every one of us has actually, in the depths of our heart, have rejected God himself. Once we realize that we're much more like Zacchaeus than we are like the good church kid, then when Jesus says our name, our response is Zacchaeus' response. His response, what does he say? He came down quickly and received him with joy. Joy. Joy is the only possible response. Again, too many of us are still living with the false hope that our possessions or our performance will make us happy. Zacchaeus knew that they wouldn't. He had already tried this. That's why he experienced joy. Because Jesus wrecked everything that Zacchaeus had spent his entire life building. And that brought this man joy. Because he had built himself a cage. He had built himself a trap. And so when Jesus wrecks that, demolishes that house, when Jesus demolishes that place he's living, the only response is joy. But that's only going to be the case if we realize that the life I built for myself, the image I built of myself, it doesn't need an alteration, it needs transformation. And this is the last thing. Conversion. One of the marks of genuine conversion is joy. That when Jesus actually knows our name and steps into our lives and says, I want to live with you, I want to be with you, I want to dine with you tonight. Like, one of the marks of genuine conversion is joy. But also, there's a change. Zacchaeus, he didn't just feel different. He lived differently. Zacchaeus didn't just have a new attitude. He had new actions. Like, Zacchaeus' conversion didn't just touch his heart, it touched his wallet. And this is the thing for every single one of us. One of the evidences of real conversion is joy. One of the evidences of real conversion is joy. But also, one of the evidences of real conversion is I'm now actually living differently. Zacchaeus did not or could not live his life after meeting Jesus in the same way that he lived his life before he met Jesus. The way he spent his money, the way he spent his time, the way who he spent his free time with, all of those things had to change. And that's true for us. If I want to know, is my conversion genuine? Is my encounter with Jesus real, or is it all in my head? The question I have to ask and answer is it all in my head? Is it all in my heart? Or has it actually touched my actions? Has it touched my wallet? Has it touched my calendar? Has it touched the way I spend my money and the way I spend my time? Am I desperate? Are you desperate? Well, good news is there's an answer. Are you interested in transformation? Well, good news. There's hope. Do you feel lost? Even more, do you realize you are lost? Well, good news. Jesus came to seek and to save what was lost.